Good afternoon, gentlemen. Before we start the Gemara share, Kevin has a dedication with some rather sad news. He will start off by teaching us for a few minutes, and then I will proceed with the Gemara share.
Okay, so this dedication to our share will be to Alan Katz, who passed away yesterday, father of Dory, a good friend of mine, and Gavin and Damon know him very well. And his name is Chaim Eliyahu ben Shalom HaKohen. So the family should only have simchas and comfort and have comfort at this time. So going back to last week's parasha of Parashat Yitro, it details all the 10 commandments. And one of the commandments, which we sometimes take for granted, is honoring one's parents. And it's commandment number 5. I don't know if the order has anything to do with the importance. It says here, when people honor their parents, Hashem regards it as if they honor him, because he was partners with them in the creation of their offspring, and so it's quite an important thing. The importance of it is stressed over there. And also it says there that another thing is on the tablets regarding man. It's how you relate to Hashem is by honoring one's parents, and he wants us to. It says here, last thing, he wants us to show parents, for this commandment was included among those that referred to the honor and the reverence that are due to Hashem himself, as I mentioned earlier. And I just want to see, there's one more thing, and it says here in Kedushin, it says, but if not, Hashem says, I did well not to live among them, for if I had dwelled among them, they'd have tormented me as well. So I'm not sure why it says this here. It basically, the parents provide for their children and bring them up, and it's they can be forgotten and taken for granted in later years. So that's why it's very important not to forget this.
Okay. All right, guys, before we go to the Gemara share, I just wanted to say that while I don't know Amit and Tal, I do know Dory's been a friend of myself and Robert Oppenheimer and Kevin and the guys for many years, and Yochi Katz I've known since 2011 through DAC travel, because every time I go overseas and I land up sick, she ends up rescuing me and getting me a plane back to South Africa. And both Yochi and Dory are very, very special human beings. And I'm sure Dory's siblings are too. I just haven't had the privilege of knowing them. And I just would like to wish the family long life and much hatzlacha and success, and hope that the Gemara share, as well as Kevin's teaching us about Mustav, honoring one's mother and father, is going to be an aliyah for Alan's neshama. So just a big thank you, Kevin, for bringing it to our attention. When we left off on the Gemara share yesterday, what we were discussing is risk mitigation, meaning that if there was a body corporate or a union of workers or a trust fund or a guild of cooperation, then what would happen is each member would pay their contributions or their premium in order to mitigate their risk. So whilst in the Gemara uses the example of donkeys, what we can see is that it has certain relevances in both modern law as well as, when I say modern, I mean Roman, Dutch, South African law, American law, English law. Roman Dutch law comes from Saxon law, by the way, which is partially English in certain respects, except for intellectual property and certain other parts of South African law. Yeah, that's more English, and other aspects are more Roman Dutch. So one of the issues we were talking about is, let's use a modern example, is that if somebody's in a townhouse complex, and this was in days before insurance company underwriting, then if each person had a car of similar value, each member of the townhouse complex, which might, like Hazelwood, have 70 or 80 units, would contribute a monthly fee that if one of the cars had to go missing within the premises, they would be covered with the internal pool of money collected. And what we are saying is here is that if there was a co-op formed or a body corporate, then you can't suddenly renege and pull out when it's not your car that's stolen and your fellow contributee, because they can force you to keep to your commitments. Because whilst you were joined, you had the privilege of being covered by those associates of yours that were prepared to bear the brunt of your risk. And that we are saying that if the car is stolen, they won't refund you the value of the car. What they'll do is they'll make sure you get the same car that was stolen. The reason being is the other aspect to this was that each person would be, for example, on donkey watch duty or car watch duty, whatever modern analogy you have, where if you had an asset that needed to be guarded, you would equally guard your fellow's asset if it was within the same garages or the same animal husbandry pen. And if you were paid out in cash, they'd worried that since you no longer had an interest in making sure your asset was safe, you certainly wouldn't be vigilant in watching the asset of your fellow, since it wasn't in the same parking lot or in the same horse stable as your fellow contributees. They don't pay out for negligence, that's obvious. And the Gemara now deals with this issue and say, it's also obvious that they need not accede to his demand for cash. So why would the Brisa trouble to say so, that they're prepared to give you what you lost, but it has to be in the same asset base so that you look after your fellow Jews' assets? And the Gemara says, no, according to the Brisa's ruling, you need it in the case where he has another donkey, for example, in the caravan, not just the donkey of his that was stolen. And you might have said that since he's guarding that other secondary donkey anyway, it's not necessary for him to have purchased a replacement donkey for the first one that went missing, because the onus on him would still be to protect his property by agreeing to the duty on a roster of watching and guarding all the donkeys in the particular stable, and therefore he would fulfill his obligations. So therefore the Bryce has to inform us that a person's guarding of one donkey is different than his guarding of two donkeys. So what do we mean? Very, very simple. The more assets you've got, if you've got two cars in the garage of the parking lot in the body corporate of a building like Hazelwood, as opposed to one car, you're even more committed to doing your weekly roster duty to look after the cars, because bearing in mind, it's not like South Africa where you can hire a black security guard. We're talking in a time where you couldn't underwrite to insurance company and just pay a small premium that was accumulative with actuarial figures calculated on probability of risk of 1 million or so members. That's why our premiums are so low, because when you've got millions of members contributing to the fund, the statistical probability with certain due diligence features of making sure somebody has to take a polygraph test in case they're lying, and get a police case number, describe the scene of the accident or theft, etc. They've got measures to ensure that no one's claiming unnecessarily or exaggerating the loss of the claim. But when you're in the what do you call it, a developing economic system, the best you can do is get together as a consortium with a group of friends but then your premium contribution is going to be a lot higher because there are less people involved. So we're saying that if you've got one asset to look after, then surely we could give you that other value that was stolen in cash. And the Gemara say, no, the Brisa doesn't agree, because the more assets you got in the public parking lot within the complex, the more you're going to be vigilant in making sure nobody breaks into that garage at where your cars are parked and your fellow flatmates are parked within the complex. Does that make sense, guys? You'd have much more of an interest. I'm sure it's pretty straightforward so far. So the Gemara's cite a related brisa, and they say, look, if you take a similar case concerning a ship that was traveling in the sea, and you had a gale force wind that threatened to inundate it, when they use the word inundated with water. In other words, it capsizes because the currents are developing huge swells, and those swells, if the wave breaks, there's going to be nothing left of your small boat. So what happens is the passengers aboard the ship are starting to dump cargo to lighten the load. And what happens is the Gemara is first suggesting that they calculate each person's portion by weight. They don't calculate it by value. Why would they calculate it by weight? Well, obviously, weight is what's holding the ship down. And in order to create buoyancy, the weight is the problem, not the value of the goods, if you want to just look at staying afloat. So, for example, it's a bit of a problem, because that's to say that if one passenger is transporting gold and one is transporting iron, and the one transporting gold had to throw 100 liras of gold overboard in terms of weight, the one transporting iron is required to match him with nothing more than 100 liters of iron. In other words, they're both throwing out the same weight, but you don't have to be a genius to know that, he doesn't have to throw away, for example, a kilogram of iron to match a kilogram of gold. Your first thought is, well, maybe you should just give the financial equivalent. But if you just gave the financial equivalent, while that's fair, doesn't get rid of the weight problem, creating a high probability of the boat to sink. Just so you know, you need not throw overboard a measure of iron equal to the value of gold. So what one could do, if you're really, really smart, is if you've got gold that's very heavy and your shipmates have got equivalent weight that would make up your weight, you would say, listen, let me pay you the value of what you're throwing overboard in terms of weight with gold, if you let me keep my gold and not throw it overboard. In other words, you can compel the owner of the iron to throw a second 100 liras in the place of your gold, and then you reimburse the value of the iron for an extra 100 liras. You might even say to the guy, I'll give you 150 liras worth, but it's certainly worthwhile not to throw your gold and to try and negotiate with others of the ship, so that you might share in the weight being cast overboard regarding cargo, so the ship remains buoyant, but it needn't be by value if you can get out of it. But they're saying, however, they should not deviate in this matter from the usual practice of the sailors, meaning we have to follow the prevailing custom among sailors, whether it be that you calculate according to weight or according to the value or by some other measure. Meaning, if they say it's by value of what the item is worth, then it's a much fairer system in terms of ethics. But the problem is it's not going to get hold of the root of the problem is that there's a certain amount of weight that you need to get rid of on board. So they don't deal exactly with what to do as far as that's concerned. But what they say is that if you've got sailors in a convoy of ships, they can stipulate amongst themselves that whoever who loses a ship, they can provide another ship for him. So they're saying, all right, the cargo issue aside, they've got a very similar issue to the cars in a parking lot within a townhouse complex, or donkeys within or horses within the stable owned by different um, racehorse riders. And in that particular case, they've provided this sort of group insurance where each one pays a certain portion to provide for a donkey that died or a ship that sunk. So again, the same theme is reiterated. It said, all who are party to the stipulation must abide by it. Any ship that was lost to him through negligence, they don't provide for him. And if it was not through negligence, they do. So it says, look, one of the issues that would lead to negligence is if the sailors and the captain of the ship went to a place where ships do not go, and he lost his ship there. In that case, they don't provide him with another ship. So in other words, if there's a particular issue that you've got, like the Bermuda Triangle, where you've got currents that converge, or extremely high swells, and the probability of ships going down, to which most customs prevail that ships avoid that area from historical evidence as to the fact that it's rather dangerous, they're not going to pay you to replace your ship if it's negligence and there's been a track record put forward to there. Now, the Gemara also says, look, it's obvious. Why do we have to single out this case in particular? And the Brisa said it's not obvious because it discusses a particular situation. Firstly, it's not only the factor that comes into place is that particular ocean latitude and longitude location dangerous. It's saying there's certain other factors that can make it a safe area to travel or a dangerous area, and that is season. So, for example, it uses an example that during Nisan, the month of Nisan, when it's Pesach, you have ships that generally distance themselves one rope's length from the riverbank. And during Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah time, which is 6 months later, they distance themselves 2 ropes of length. Okay? And he went during the days of Nisan to the place of Tishrei. So what does that actually mean? Is during Nisan, the rivers are swollen because what's happened is winter has turned to spring in Nisan in the northern hemisphere, and then the rivers obviously are starting to swell up with melted snow from the warming up season and rainwater. So the ships have to sail at a distance of as little as 1 rope length away from the riverbank. Okay. Now, if you've got an issue where he went during the days of Nisan to the place of Tishrei, we are saying that it's a little bit different, because if you look at the actual summer, eventually when the heat starts to step up, especially in Israel where you've got 42 to 47 degrees, there's going to be a lot of evaporation. So by the time August, September arrives, the ships are forced to remain at a distance of 2 ropes length from the riverbank. Why? Because they can become stranded in shallow water near the shore. And this particular sailor, as an example, sailed at a 2 rope distance during the Nisan season. So in the meantime, he found himself in the middle of a swollen, surging river. Powerful currents, too much, and it ended up that his boat was capsized. So there's a second issue that's come into the factor here. It's not only the location in terms of latitude and longitude, it's how does the water and the weather behave within different seasons and months of the year. And it doesn't constitute negligence, it's suggesting, because maybe it just followed a previously safe pattern based on history of previous months. And the Brisa says it does constitute negligence, because you can't just say if you've been here the last 6 months and you haven't picked up a problem, that's not negligent. What you've got to do before you take yourself in a dangerous situation is you need to get a history of not just your experience on the water, but how thousands of other sailors that have travailed that path have dealt with it over the ensuing decades of fluctuant weather conditions and turbulence in order to find an objective picture of how the current weather and area are going to behave in different situations of different months of the year. It would be the same as suggesting that during the day, it's perfectly safe to drive through Wynberg if your offices are in Wynberg from going from Orange Grove towards Wynberg. I would highly suggest at 3 o'clock in the morning that you might not go to your offices in Wynberg, because as dark as it is, some other dark creature will attack you, and it's not a good idea. So you have to take the situation into account.
I wouldn't even go there 3 o'clock in the afternoon, never mind 3 o'clock at night.
And again,
anyway,
that's why I
that's just
gathered
me.
if we form a consortium, it's going to be one of our first partners, because paranoid people generally don't get caught out, and I give Gavin 10 out of 10 for that. So when we get back to the Gemara, it says there's another brisa regarding a caravan, and that is the rabbis taught that if a caravan was traveling in the desert and a troop of bandits came against it and plundered it, and one of the members of the caravan rose up bravely and he rescued the plundered property, he's rescued it for everybody. So what happens in that case is he doesn't take what he collected and just distribute it evenly. What actually happens is if he gets the property that was stolen back, each one claims his own property. It's not about even distribution. Whatever was taken from this person, if they can identify and recognize that it's taken, and he rescues it on behalf of everyone. What were you going to say, Kev?
Is it also, could he not say it's considered hefker, and he may be able to take as much as he wants?
Excellent. So the one thing I can tell you from the rest of the group is that Kevin is on the cutting edge of doing chazorah, and he's prepared well because he's going to get to the theme now. But you're only as good as your last performance, and right now your last performance is sterling. So that's good enough for me. And you're much more awake. I don't know if you're taking Red Bull, coffee, and cocaine, but you're much more awake as of late, and it's lovely to see. And
He's not getting the cocaine from me, I just wanted to clear the air, because it's on YouTube. All right.
Arthur, you gave it to me when I was in last Shabbos, remember?
I think thou dost protest too much, as Shakespeare would say. So, guys, what we are saying is, if he stand up and said, "I'll rescue the property," the default position is he has rescued it for everyone in the caravan, and each one can claim his own property from the goods that person rescued. But if before he set out on this little excursion adventure, he said, "I will rescue the goods for myself," he has indeed rescued it only for himself. In other words, he's entitled to keep all the property for himself. He need not return it to the original owners. And this is the answer that Kevin was alluding to. Is you might say it's unfair. How can somebody else go and rescue it, steal my stuff? He's no better than a thief. So the Gemara says, well, look, what's the case we're talking about? It's basically where the members of the caravan can really rescue their property themselves. But they're kind of lazy to do so. And then even in this brisa second case too, where he stipulated that he's basically working on his own behalf to rescue the property, the rescued property should be for everybody. Why? Because it's saying, look, if everybody is capable of rescuing the property themselves, it's not in an ownerless state. Therefore, the rescuer should be required to return it. So if you're all able-bodied men and can rescue your property, I can't go on your behalf, take it and claim it as myself. Why? Because you're capable enough to pick it up over and above what I am. You might just prefer to leave in the light of day, not leave at night, in order to cross over and try and steal from the bandits that stole from you. Give me one sec, Kev. And what we are saying is here, if you're capable of rescuing it, you haven't got to a stage of Yu'ush. For those that don't know what Yu'ush means, it means despair, meaning when you despair of getting your item back, you've relinquished ownership of it because you no longer consider it your asset. And then as an ownerless state through the despair, another person can rescue it and claim it of themselves. But if you're capable of rescuing your own goods, you haven't given up in your mind and despaired of having retrieved it. So either way, whether you collect it for us or collect it for yourself, you cannot take what you do not own. Otherwise, you're equally a thief and the law will make you return it. And that's only on the premise that the others are quite capable of rescuing the goods themselves. Kev, you had a question?
No, I was going to bring that up. If they have despaired, if Yerush comes into play and they have despaired, then you could use that as a proof that he can claim it, that it's Hefka.
Exactly. So what we are saying is here, the minute anybody else could rescue it, the same as the person that said, I'm going to go on the excursion and rescue it, and what I get to collect, I keep. He can't do that. He's no better than the thief. The law will make him return it because they haven't given up ownership of their goods through hopelessness and through despair. So it is not ownless. Okay? So that's what the Gemara is proposing, exactly as Kevin said. And therefore, the rescuer should be required to return it because it's not in an ownerless state because there's no Yush. So that's situation one. But if there is a case where the members of the caravan can't rescue their own property, then even in the first case too, where the rescuer failed to stipulate whether he was collecting it for himself or others, it doesn't matter either way. When the rest of the caravan members despair of getting their goods back, they're plunging the goods into a state of hefker, of ownerlessness. And then based on that, he doesn't even have to declare his intentions of personal collection. He gets to acquire the property from them anyway, and therefore it should be his because through their despair, they've rendered it ownerless. So the Gemara says, either way, it's a problem. How do we resolve it? So Rami Bava Kamma said that the Brisa speaks in all cases, both where the others are able to rescue their goods and where they are unable to do so. And here in the Brisa, we're dealing with the case where the rescuer and other members of the caravan were actually business partners in the stolen property. In other words, they were partners, they owned the asset, and then the asset was stolen from them. And in such a case, okay, where his money stands to be lost, a partner may dissolve the partnership and divide its assets without the consent of his fellow partners. So, in other words, I can divide the assets of my fellow partners and say, well, I'm just collecting what's good for me, and then I get to keep what's mine. But the Brisa could be understood as follows. If the rescuer said, look, I'm going to rescue it for myself, he has in effect effectively divided the assets, so therefore he can keep whatever he rescues as a portion of the former partnership, meaning anything more that he collects where it exceeds his share of the assets, he has to distribute it to the partners according to the percentage of their partnership contribution, providing they're equally capable of collection, because then your ush hasn't taken place and they haven't given up the ability through collecting, and it doesn't become ownerless. And if he didn't say anything, he hasn't divided the assets at all. So whatever he rescues is shared with his partners. But if he does say something and they're not physically capable of collecting it, then in that particular case, he can keep it. So look, there's an obvious difficulty here. Where the partners were unable to retrieve the merchandise, it's hefker because they certainly despaired of its recovery. So once the goods are hefker, the partnership is effectively over anyway. So the question is, why should the rescuer have to share merchandise he acquired from the Yeush, a state of despair in which it becomes ownerless with his former partner? So one of the answers is that we presume that when he acquired the objects from the state of Hefker, he certainly intended to acquire them on behalf of his partners. Why? Because often when you work for the business or you've got partners, one partner sometimes works at night in order for the good of the business. So it's not that unusual that you might extend yourself for your business partners because your partners have extended themselves to you over the years. Alternatively, since one of the partners, like in this case, the rescuer, is ready, willing, and able to throw himself into the business of retrieving the goods don't become hefker, even though the others are unable to rescue them, because they trust in his ability to rescue them, and therefore they haven't given up on the Yeush aspect. So he can keep what's his and then have to give over the difference where his partnership percentage no longer gives him rights to keep the excess. I've only got a few minutes, then we're done, guys. Then we game, set, match done. And in fact, Gavin has to go. Gav, should we call it a day here before we go to the second explanation? We can go to it tomorrow. You've got to work.